Welcome to the Sherman Report. Here's Peter Sherman.
Good afternoon or good evening as we move towards the supper hour. It's a Thursday, and it's the last one in August, and I can feel that long weekend around the corner, can't you? Once you get to Thursday, when there's a long weekend coming, you say, hey, I'm ready. Stay tuned for today's show. Sue Ann Levy will be joining us, and we're going to be political today. There's a lot of political news out there because, of course, Parliament will be coming back in a few weeks, and so everybody's jockeying for position. That'll be around 15 minutes from now before Sue Ann joins us. First, the latest information, which I got with my morning coffee today and then some. And you might not understand that comment, so I'll give you a little bit of background. By the time I get up in the morning, I've watched some TV and I've read some newspapers. And as you may or may not know, I'm a news junkie. So when it comes to television, I might watch Al Jazeera. I might watch Israel I-24. I might watch Deutsche Welle or NHK Japan. There's so much BBC. So you're not stuck with CTV or CBC or the American networks. You can look at everything. And if you put it all together and wrap your mind around it, you get an idea of what's really happening because everything has its own particular slant. And what you don't want is a slant, or at least I don't. I have my slant, but it comes from digesting all of this. Anyway, there's a new political poll out from Leger, pretty respected pollsters. Not surprisingly, the Conservatives are maintaining their wide lead, standing at 43% of voters, with the Liberals 18% behind them at 25%. Been in that ballpark now for over a year? Both of those parties gained 2 points. Where did they come from? Well, doesn't take too much thinking. The big move was with the NDP. The NDP dropped precipitously by 5 percentage points from 20% down to 15%. The polling organization is saying that it wants to stress it may be significant, or perhaps this is an outlier poll. What that means is a one-off situation. Anyway, the Conservatives are number 3 behind the Bloc and the Liberals. In Quebec, Justin Trudeau is also part of this survey, aside from the parties themselves. And so we have figures on what the satisfaction level is with his government. 40%, 28% of respondents said they were satisfied with his government, 28%. 40% stated that they were not satisfied. In fact, what they termed it is very dissatisfied with the Trudeau government. And the Leger people are saying those are the ones that Trudeau has to be worried about. Those are the ones who sit down for a coffee with a friend or dinner with the family, and they talk politics and they slag the guy that they don't like. And if 40% of voters are saying, we really don't like Trudeau, then he's got something that he's got to contend with. So, spread your feelings amongst family and friends. Or in my case, I'll spread them right here on the Sherman Report. I never said the news I provide is unbiased. That's why it has my name on it. Anyway, on another topic, but not included in this poll, is the issue of Gazan refugees. Speculating on the large downward trend of the New Democrats, there are several things that may be responsible. And one is the relatively sparse profile during the summer for leader Jagmeet Singh. And another could be the rough battle the NDP government in British Columbia is having. That province is in the midst of an election. Canadians also seem to be short on confidence in how the government is vetting newcomers. Now, here's one point I find tremendously interesting and somewhat disturbing. Canada appears to be the only country in the world that is open to Gazan refugees. Support for the increased intake is strongest in the NDP at 69% favorable. In fairness, there were majorities in favor within the Liberal, Bloc Québécois, and Green parties, while 2/3 of Conservatives surveyed are negative on that topic. You have to decide where you stand, but that's where the parties stand. Might be worth adding that every single other country in the world is not allowing Gazans in, period. What do they know that our government doesn't? That's the only question I can come up with. If you recall, the government announced in May that it had issued 5,000 temporary resident visas to Gazan refugees, a quintupling of the number first announced, and that was last December. Remember, the visas are for people whose home was in Gaza and who have had their homes and lives radically changed. Radically changed. If you've looked at the pictures, there's been a war there, and there are not a lot of homes left standing. Also remember how that war began. It was Hamas militants from Gaza who made it into Israel and attacked young people at a music festival, and families living in kibbutzes or kibbutzim, among others. They killed over 1,400 in the most brutal ways possible and took several hundred hostages, some of whom are still captive or some are dead. We don't know. Anyway, many who have yet to be liberated. So who opened this door? That's the question you have to ask there. Back in a moment on the issue of Mark Zuckerberg and censorship.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
All right, so you all know who Mark Zuckerberg is, or Zuckerberg. He is smart, obviously smart, and a super wealthy guy. Did you see the pictures that were flashing around on news channels about him and his yacht? I can't remember the size of it. 250, 300. This is an ocean-going vessel. It's unbelievable, and I think it's worth 300 million, something like that. A lot of money, big boat. Anyway, he's a smart and super wealthy guy for sure. And he's also a candidate in my book for A-hole of the week. Not surprisingly, he seems to have shifted the position he's leaned towards, which was that of Joe Biden and the Democrats, since being accused of and actually admitting to biases evident on his Facebook and Instagram apps. He also lays the bias squarely on the doorstep of President Biden's government. Zuckerberg wrote to Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, who has been leading a congressional investigation into big tech censorship. Zuckerberg said he was repeatedly pressured by the White House to censor dissenting content about COVID-19. And here's a quote: "I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I feel strongly that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction, and we're ready to push back if something like this happens again." Well, okay, I'll believe it when I see it, because you had freedom of choice when you got the pressure in the first place, and you either pushed back, which you clearly didn't, or you can now say you're going to push back, which you clearly are. So, wow, I just wonder whether we'd have ever heard that from Mark Zuckerberg if Congressman Jordan had not been running his investigation. So if you're wondering why you sometimes had posts removed or saw a banner that said the post here has been removed because of political concerns or because it was medical information that hasn't been verified, all kinds of things that we saw during that period of time and we never got a real explanation. Maybe now you have part of a real explanation. All right. Without taking a pause, let me dive into an opinion piece published in today's Toronto Star. Kind of interesting. And let me try to précis this because it's a long one. It's from a column authored by Justin Ling of the Toronto Star. And he cites Ottawa Pride, which early in August issued a statement that announced solidarity with Palestine and ongoing genocide in Gaza. It also called for an immediate ceasefire. Various people with platforms which they use to speak from, or from which they use to speak, have called for, or did call for, boycotts, saying Pride organizers were turning the parade into an anti-Israel stunt. More than a dozen groups, including prominent Jewish groups, Ottawa Mayor Mark Sutcliffe, and even the Liberal Party of Canada boycotted the Ottawa Pride Parade. At the same time, and this is where it gets interesting, the Pride organization denounced the rise in Jew hatred here in Canada, condemned Hamas terrorism, and called for all hostages to be released. It sounds a bit two-sided. And I'm never going to understand this ridiculous linkage of Canadian pride with Gaza and Hamas. What is it about being thrown off a rooftop just for admitting to being gay in places like Gaza or Iran that some people don't seem to understand? Anyway, for anyone who doubts the feeling in Jewish quarters, Mr. Ling reminds us that in the last week, bomb threats were received by about 125 Jewish institutions across Canada, and there have been ongoing instances of anti-Jewish graffiti, fire bombings, violent assaults. Jews have seen this before. The Star piece goes on to quote the Canada-Israel Jewish Affairs Group, CJA for short, Its CEO is Shimon Fogel, and Shimon Fogel says there's room for criticism of the war and solidarity with the Palestinian people, but he did not accept Capital Pride's statement as being nuanced. He apparently responded that he wondered why they'd make common cause with those who want to be strung up from a crane. I mean, if you go there, that's what happens. I'm not exaggerating. Here's my message. I'm a little different as a Canadian Jewish person. I know what faction began this war, but I also knew long ago which faction would end it, and really not in a pretty fashion. There are many who think that because Jews marched into the gas chambers in World War II, they would never be able to fight ferociously because, hey, after all, we're all accountants and lawyers and doctors and multimillionaires. Well, here's a flash. We are some of those things, but like everybody else in every other denomination or group in the country, indeed in the world, we are other things. We're a good fit with this country, Canada. We have been indeed since Canada became a country, and we'll never be intimidated. And we wonder why any identifiable and non-religious based group like Capital Pride sees anything to be involved with insofar as militant Islamic countries are concerned. I will say this, Jews and gays do actually have something in common here. We'd both be killed if we entered Gaza. Back in a moment.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Here's one we'll call liberals against liberals. I don't know how many of you are aware that there are two federal by-elections underway currently. One is in the Montreal riding of LaSalle, Emard, Verdun, which is what we're going to talk about. The other one is out west. And they're liberal held. The one in Montreal was held by the former Justice Minister, David Lametti. Obviously, he was a liberal. And now Liberal Party workers are experiencing a revolt by exactly whom? Well, it's by ministerial staffers working on that campaign, 52 persons to be exact. And are you ready for this? They're all Arab and Muslim staffers. They wrote to Justin Trudeau to say that they aren't participating in the by-election campaign as they were to do. Why? Now quoting, while many of us started our political careers in elections as volunteers, we can no longer, in good conscience, campaign for a party that excludes us and our values. These Liberal staff members have the support of influential Arab and Muslim donors in London, Ottawa, and Montreal. Polling has shown that both Muslims and Jewish groups are stepping back from the Liberal Party. And a community spokesperson said it like this: I'm hoping that the party recognizes that this is not some people who may or may not be donating. Maybe they think they can find other donors, but you can't just find 50 staff overnight. What the staff are really trying to do is help the Liberal Party wake up, and they're taking this extreme step to do so. And that's the end of the quote. So here are the issues. They won't participate in activities as party members until the government changes its diplomatic posture to, quote, join our allies in explicitly condemning Israel for its numerous war crimes and for the genocidal rhetoric from members of the Israeli cabinet. Boy, I've never seen a war that affected Canada so much. It's got to tell you something about this wonderful multicultural situation we live in. But anyway, I digress. We'll talk to Sue Ann about that. They want Canada to join their allies, Norway, Spain, and Ireland, in recognizing the state of Palestine. Sure, let's side with those superpowers. Just saying. Anyway, they support the NDP demand that the government revoke existing arms export permits to Israel and close loopholes that allow Canadian-made arms to be shipped through third countries. They want an end to all research collaboration on military and dual-use technologies between Canadian and Israeli researchers. And that's the end of that quote. So why don't you throw your cell phones and your computers into Lake Ontario? Because you can't have those because they're full of Israeli technology, don't you know? Or maybe take Waze and dump that as an app because that comes from Israel too. Look, the Prime Minister's office issued a statement saying it continues to stand behind the call for an immediate ceasefire. That's called putting one foot firmly on either side of a fence. Quote, we fully stand behind the comprehensive ceasefire deal outlined by President Biden and endorsed by the UN Security Council. The statement said we call on parties to the conflict to agree to the deal, and delay will only see more lives lost. I think Israel's already agreed to it. The statement also said Hamas must lay down its arms and release all hostages, demanded civilians be protected and called for a sustained increase in the flow of humanitarian assistance throughout Gaza. And I would say, have a great time, guys, and don't help the Liberals. Works for me. Back in a moment with Sue Ann Levy.
Now, the Sherman Report continues.
Ann Levy is best known for the decades she spent with the Toronto Sun covering City Hall, although that's far from her entire CV. Sue Ann is a news hound who is regularly published in True North. She's an author. She holds a business degree. She's also a friend of mine because I like smart people, and Sue Ann is certainly one of those, and also someone who would never back down from any challenge, nor keep quiet when she feels like speaking out because she thinks speaking out can help. So there's Sue Ann Levy. Welcome to the Sherman Report.
Thanks, Peter. How are you?
I'm good. We used to talk together on the radio, but I couldn't see you, and neither could they. Now things have changed. This is what television has become.
Exactly.
Okay, so
thank goodness we both lost weight, or we look like.
Well, you know what? We could get into that personal conversation quite a bit, I think, on both our parts. And I don't know how you did it. I think you used fasting, intermittent fasting.
I went on a program that was given to me at a clinic in Boca Raton, which was metabolic eating and included fasting.
And it works.
And it worked.
Clearly. And I didn't do it that way. I had my knee replaced back in December. And for the first 3-4 weeks, I was in such pain that I couldn't eat. And I lost 35 pounds. So I figured, hell, I wanted to lose 50. All I have to do now is 15. And I did. Anyway, enough about you and me and our weight. Let me ask you a question. Just throw it up in the air because it really plays on what I was talking about at the first part of the program. What do you make of this business in the Montreal by-election, where it appears these 52 Liberal employees seconded to the campaign are balking and threatening Justin Trudeau that they'll work for the NDP, if you can believe it, unless he starts leaning more their way, and that is the Muslim way. They think Trudeau favors Israel in the Middle East war.
Well, we Jews in Canada would say quite the opposite. But what I think is just to hell with them, fire them all. There are a lot of people out there who need jobs, and I'm sure that they could find other workers, others who are interested in politics. But even more than that, if we want to dig down on this is what happens when you have a government that sucks and blows about Israeli policy, about whether they support Muslims. One day they support
about
them.
Everything.
Yeah. And have enabled, and we see it in our cities, enabled these pro-Palestinian protesters to take to the streets and shout, hateful venom about Jews and the end of Israel and things like that. And this is the end result. They're going to keep pushing because they've already been enabled to do many, many things.
Well, I think our prime minister has a problem in that writing, and it's not as easy. I think I agree with you. You could fire them and hire other people. I don't think he's the kind of guy who will do that because of precisely what you said. He sucks and blows. He's going to try to win them over. But the verbiage that he's using in trying to do that doesn't sound like it's going to work.
Well, he can try. And, you're probably right that he probably will kowtow to them, make some sort of promise. But like you said, okay, you want to engage in BDS, you want to end academic ties, you want to do all these things that you've mentioned, then get rid of all your products, your health, some of your prescription drugs, get rid of Waze, get rid of the computer chip in your iPhone, or get rid of your iPhone, I guess. The BDS movement is nothing more than an anti-Semitic movement to try to isolate the Jewish state. We've seen it all over the last 10 to almost 11 months.
Well, I think probably over the last 10 years, because for quite a while you would go religiously, no connection intended, every year to Queen's Park. And this was on Al-Quds Day. Al-Quds means Jerusalem in Arabic. And that's how it's referred to by people who are pro-Palestinian. But long before there was any war, They were on the steps of Queen's Park
Mhm.
demonstrating without a permit and yelling, "Kill the Jews." Am I right?
Yes, they were, really awful, awful people. And when they actually got kicked out of Queen's Park, and they ended up on the streets of Toronto on University Avenue in front of Osgoode Hall. And I mean, they bust in people with very professional signs calling for the destruction of Israel. They walked up University Avenue, accompanied by cops. So, I mean, the cops, don't get me started on that because they've been so weak when it comes to hate crimes in this city. But that was the start of it. That was, I mean, we're talking 10 years ago. You're right. The Queers Against Israeli Apartheid and the Pride Parade. Like you said before, the whole issue of what the hell do gay people like me want to do with associating with terrorists who hate them and would throw them off rooftops? Uh, they're really, really confused people, obviously.
Well, it goes back longer than that, and I'm not here slagging a particular people. I I, I have plenty of friends in that community,
Mhm.
but generally speaking, we've had a problem that goes way back before a war, and the war is simply an amplifier of the entire thing. We're sitting here in Canada, and Canada doesn't work the same way countries in the Middle East or anywhere else works. It
Mhm.
is arguably the most multi diverse country in the entire world,
Mhm.
and we've prided ourselves in the fact that we all get along, but we don't, do we?
Not anymore. I don't think I've ever seen so many Jew haters come from out from under the rocks and infest social media with impunity. Uh, I can think of one particular person who's being sued by or there's a suit before the Human Rights Tribunal. Our good friend, QP Ontario, Fred Han, who has doubled down consistently with his Jew hatred. I mean, I think it's actually become very trendy. I mean, people marching on the streets, half the time they don't know what they're marching for. It's crazy times.
Well, when this all began, people were um, asking, I'm talking reporters now from radio, television, print, asking people, do you know what from the river to the sea means?
Yeah,
And they'd say, it means Palestine. And they'd say, what river? And they wouldn't know. And they'd say, what sea? And they'd get answers like the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean.
Caribbean.
So,
I heard
yeah,
Caribbean.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll leave that one. And I hope at some point we can look forward to it being settled, if it ever can be settled. It's very disheartening. I
Hmm.
speak now as a Canadian and a Jewish man, and
Hmm.
I'd like to see it go away. Let's talk for a little bit about polling. I mentioned the Leger poll that was published this morning,
Hmm.
saying that Jagmeet Singh and his socialists have lost a quarter of their voter support. I mean, if that is an accurate poll, it could be a one-off. We don't know, but it's
Hmm.
down from 20 to 15% support countrywide. And the Conservatives have picked up 2 points, standing at 43%, also countrywide, with the exception of Quebec. Liberals benefited from another 2 points. They're up to 25%. But bare bones is that if an election were held today, the result would be a rout of the governing Liberals and a diminishing of the NDP and a majority government for the Conservatives. Sound right to you?
Yeah, and are you surprised? I'm not in the slightest. I mean, Jagmeet Singh cozied up to Justin Trudeau and has never been critical of anything. And the very people they purport to represent, the NDPers, the working class people, have been, you know, trodden on uh, with inflation, the debt, the prices skyrocketing, the price of gas, the price of food. And so, should we be surprised that the NDP are going down the tubes? I mean, really, Peter, do you think we need three parties in this country? I don't think so.
Well, I've never thought that we did, but I don't hold any brief that anybody who wants to conform a party and go and see what you can do.
Mhm.
Technically, there are about five parties that we know of operating,
Mm,
like the Max Bernier Party
right.
and the Greens, and there are probably 20 other parties that field candidates in some ridings and never elect anybody, so we don't even know their names. But the bottom line here is that the NDP, and you pointed out Jagmeet Singh, he hasn't been around very much this summer. I don't think he has the slightest idea how economics work. And if he sat down with a working economist and said, translate this into English, he'd stop saying that, I don't know, Galen Weston caused the inflation because he charges too much at Loblaws. And more or less, that's the kind of thing that Jagmeet is out. That's bumper slogan politics, when everybody knows that inflation is an inflation of the money supply, which was done by the governing Liberals. They created a monster deficit in the order of $60 billion. That's inflation. And the result is what you see at Loblaws and everywhere else.
Yes, exactly. It's the monetary policy. And, Jagmeet Singh it's really rich of him to talk about prices at Loblaws when you see him in a Rolex watch. And the guy likes to spend, himself with, his wife. We've seen him heard in designer frocks. And I'm not saying they should live like poor people, but they're so disconnected from the average Canadian. It's unreal.
It's true. And as a matter of fact, they're saying it was a stunt today by Pierre Poilievre. And in political terms, it is a bit of a stunt. But Poilievre wrote and released a letter to Jagmeet Singh. I don't know if you've heard about this one. He called on Jagmeet to collapse his party's support for the Trudeau Liberals and help get a carbon tax election going as soon as possible because Canada needs it. They aren't even back sitting in the Commons yet, and you can see it's already starting. So there's maybe a year left to call an election because the 4 years runs out in October of 2025. And so you need another 4 to 6 weeks to hold one before the 4-year deadline. I'm guessing the election has to be within about 12 months from now. So I'm going to put you on the spot like it's a really hard question. What's your look ahead view?
Well, I was thinking about that before I came on. I hope, maybe this is wishful thinking, that Justin Trudeau will take that walk in the snow sometime over the winter. January is a good month to take a walk in the snow. The problem is that there's not too much talent on the bench, in the back benches. Do you want Krista Freeland, leading the party? Do you want, everybody in that party has baggage. And I have to say that, I talk to people and they feel like they don't have a prime minister. They feel like they don't have people looking out for them. They've gotten away with so much. I wish the election would be held in the spring. I really do. But I guess Trudeau's going to hang on unless he takes that walk in the snow and they get somebody else in place. Maybe they'll do a Kamala and put somebody in, 5 weeks before the election. But
who knows? You and I have the same background in being declared conservatives for a very long time. So we're not trying to put anything over on anybody. The thing that surprises me, and I wonder if you get the same thing, is that the people who speak the loudest to me and say we got to get rid of that Trudeau are people who typically vote Liberal.
I know, and like I want to say that any Jewish member of the community who votes Liberal, who votes in the next election, should be ashamed of themselves. The way that they've treated the Jewish community is just absolutely outrageous. And I don't understand why Anthony Housefeather is still hanging on for dear life. I mean, the guy I guess he's got this special anti-Semitism appointment now, but it's like crazy that.
I'll tell you something about Anthony Housefather. I was in Montreal a month ago, and I was staying with friends, and he happens to live in the building where they are, and they're friendly. So I said, I'd like to meet him. And they said, we'll ask him to come for a glass of wine. And I don't know. And the lady of the house said to me, this is my friend, you're not going to get into a pissing contest. I said, no, I'm respectful of other people and their opinions. And I found him to be a very nice guy. But I also found that he's polled his people. And I know one thing about Housefather. He has sold himself on himself as opposed to going door to door and selling the Liberal Party. And I think he believes, and he may be right, that in the town of Mount Royal and Côte St. Luc, he'll find himself by a much reduced margin still in office again. But we'll have to wait and see for when that election comes.
Well, I secretly hope that it's a party of two, like happened to Kim Campbell a what was it, a decade
remember
ago
that.
or two? Yeah. I secretly hope
Post GST. Post GST.
Yeah, I hope they get decimated. I really do. I mean, they've just done so much damage to this country.
Sue Ann Levy, it is always a pleasure to see you. Personally and professionally, we'll call this one professional, despite the fact that we shared our struggles with the scale. Congratulations to you on that. Thank you for being
too.
with me, and I'll say goodbye to you now. Have a great day. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Sue Ann Levy from True North, I guess, these days. That's it for her. That's also it for us. This is the Sherman Report, has been for a Thursday. We'll be back tomorrow for the end of the week, and then we'll take 3 days off like everybody else. Have a nice evening. Have a nice Friday. And if I don't see you then, or you don't see me, have a terrific long weekend. Bye-bye for now.
The Sherman Report, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the video version at YouTube, Facebook, and always at petersherman.com. Thanks for listening to The Sherman Report. If you'd like to connect with Peter directly, just go to petersherman.com.